Hello! Welcome once again to the Turret of Pleasure here in the Enchanted Kingdom of Hermione. I'm here with the Emperor, just chilling. Nice cold winter day, waiting on some junior hockey and then some more hockey. It's all about hockey today. And figured I would do a video since I got a little window here. I did something recently I don't do very often. I looked at the analytics on my channel. Now, this channel was designed in the original instance during COVID, and it was just basically a way for me to yak with my friends without actually having them come over and infect me with some deadly virus. So that's sort of how it started, and a lot of people said, it's just like hanging out, talking music with you, which I thought was great, because that's exactly kind of the whole point of it. And as it's gone on, it's turned into a little bit of a YouTube channel, and I got people that watch. It's great. And I like doing it. It's fun. But I started this series recently called Where Not to Start. And it was about, like, young people or whatever, novices, approaching popular music and saying, I've heard about this band, blah, blah, blah. What's a good record to start with? And this was a topic over beers with many of my friends about various artists. And I've done a bunch of them. I did Captain Beefheart, I did Ornette Coleman, Sun Ra, and the usual number of people that care about Ornette Coleman and Captain Beefheart and Sun Ra appear to have viewed them. And then I went and did one on Frank Zappa, and by God, zillions of people watched it. And so a friend of mine, the notorious microphonic fool, said, maybe give the people what they want. And it's funny because the videos I have watched that have had the most watches have been the ones where I was panning popular bands of the past that I just I happened to not be able to stand. And so I thought, what, he's right. Give the people what they want. So today, Where Not to Start. I figured go big or go home. I'm going to do Pink Floyd. And Pink Floyd's a tough one. Where does one start with Pink Floyd? Where should one not start with Pink Floyd? Now, of course, this depends on kind of your own personal Pink Floyd experience. I feel very fortunate because I actually discovered Pink Floyd literally when they hit Canada. And I still have my original 1967, I should go dig it out, pre-recorded cassette copy of Piper at the Gates of Dawn on Columbia with the two notes. I've lost the insert, sadly. Be worth a fortune if I had that. It still plays. It's brown tape. I don't know. At any rate, I've been listening to them since that record came out. I got that from a friend of mine. I traded him something. I can't remember what it was. I think I was 8. Now, to an 8-year-old, the Piper at the Gates of Dawn was pretty interesting, if not to say completely mind-blowing. And I've followed Pink Floyd since. And they've gone, in my humble opinion, they've gone from strength to strength. But I try, with all of these things, I'm trying to imagine, let's say you're somebody who's either a young person or somebody from a completely different culture who's had no access to Western pop music, and, your friends at work say, hey, man, you should hear some Pink Floyd. Well, since we're kind of coming at these from where not to start, although sometimes there is no where not to start. On this one, I think there's a couple of cleared where not to starts. Do not start with The Wall. The Wall is a Roger Waters solo record, whether you like it or not. And Nicky Mason doesn't even play on a lot of it, nor does Rick Wright, who was fired by Waters. I'm not sure how that worked. But Waters basically just said, I'm not going to play with you in this band anymore, even though it was, I thought, a 4-piece band. But, and so as a result, you end up with a Waters record that a lot of people really like. It was a big hit. I can pretty much assure you, if it had been released as a Roger Waters solo record, it wouldn't have been anywhere near the hit. It was the name recognition. However, I do believe it may well be their best-selling record. Certainly it's their second. And a lot of people think it's their best record. I actually dislike it intensely. I don't even really consider it a Pink Floyd record. And, it's deeply flawed, let's say, in my world. The Pink Floyd ethos for my generation, and this would include people that got in on the band considerably after the first album. They were, a lot of people called them space rock. They were atmospheric. They were futuristic. They were, they created a lot of sounds. People didn't know what the heck it was. Certainly me as a young person, you get a Pink Floyd record and it would start with a sound and you'd have no idea how they had achieved that sound. Or if you did, you'd be wrong. I remember hearing the beginning of Wish You Were Here and thinking it was an orchestra, but in fact it's, I think, a bunch of glasses being run. So they're very innovative sonically. As songwriters, they weren't really very good. It took them forever to write a song, and a lot of their songs aren't exactly, it's not like this is Yes or King Crimson. These are pretty basic songs. And they were a pretty basic group. None of them, other than Dave Gilmour, were particularly virtuosic on their instruments. Don't start with The Wall. And also, even though it's very dear to my heart, don't start with Piper at the Gates of Dawn. Now, the reason for this is because it's pretty much unique in the catalog. Pink Floyd can be divided into 3 eras. Barrett era, Post-Barrett era, and then Post-Wright era is what I would call it. So you had the original band, Syd Barrett, Roger Waters, Rick Wright, Nick Mason. Bob Close was a guitar player in a very early incarnation, but he went and got a job in the civil service or something. So they were that 4-piece. They broke pretty quick. They did a bunch of really wacky hit singles. And Syd Barrett was the leader, the songwriter, the everything. The singer, the lead guitarist. From the get-go, he was extremely creative, very unique sound in his voice. He sang with an English accent, which was unusual. His imagery was very childlike and playful. And you could go as far as to say it was the work of genius. Very, very good stuff. However, Syd also was kind of a free spirit and did a whole lot of drugs. And one of my things recently is I've sort of plotted the year 1967, which can be done in some detail in the history of Pink Floyd. You can plot almost the weekend that he went over the edge. And from that point, he only came up with about 4 songs. Apples and Oranges, Scream Thy Last Scream, Vegetable Man, In the Beech Woods, Jug Band Blues. I think that's it. And then he really went through some changes, I think, on a weekend. There's a weekend a lot of people talk about. Like, saw him this day, saw him that day. He was a completely different guy. And so the decision was made, ultimately, to dispense with Syd. The more career-oriented members of the band, led by a fellow named Roger Waters, who had written exactly 1 song for the band up to that point, it was decided, look, Syd is just too much of a, dead weight. He was too unpredictable. They hired their friend Dave Gilmour, who was an old friend of Syd's, who was a pretty darn good guitar player, a blues band guy, very good looking, the girls liked him. And they glommed onto him, and they continued trying to basically be the band they had been with Syd. And they failed utterly because they didn't have Syd Barrett writing the songs. And there's one that everybody just hates. called "It Would Be So Nice." Rick Wright gave it the college try, and he was capable of some fluffy pop songs. He did the B-side of "Apples and Oranges" is a nice song, "Paint Box," but he just wasn't. He didn't have didn't have what Syd had in the hooks department, imagery department. He had the sound. His organ sound was very unique. So they kind of bumbled along. They bumbled into a #1 record with Adam Hart Mother, which featured an orchestra and a choir and a modern classical composer. You listen to it nowadays, it's not really very good. The B-side of that album was more of their sort of pop stuff. Each of the three principals writing a song. They did the album Don't Start With Ummagumma. You might think that Ummagumma is a good crossover record between the Syd era, because it does feature a Syd song in the live album, and there's a live album immediately post-Syd, and then there's a record where the four of them get to express themselves solo, which is a hoot, but it's not very good. The Nick Mason one, you got to hear it once. And they did soundtracks, and their soundtracks are all kind of, and they kind of did them. I think they did them just for money. They did them real quick. They did more. They did a soundtrack to a John Latham art film with Syd in the band that was this sort of holy grail forever. It showed up in the big box set. It's actually not very good. They weren't terrific free improvisers. They were a jam band. Nick Mason is a great guy, but he's not, Michael Shreve or Bill Bruford or whomever. And Roger Waters is just Roger Waters. Just a very, very, they're a basic rhythm section. Richard Wright, mostly a colorist on the organ, and very good at it. He really did have a unique sound. He had a way of voicing piano chords, but very soft, nothing aggressive, not like Keith Emerson or anybody like that. And then there's David Gilmour, who is a bloody good guitar player, real stylist, Strat player, pretty much, defined the sound of the modern rock Stratocaster, perhaps. And so they blended in, and a lot of people would say, where do you start with these guys? Okay, Dark Side of the Moon. Sure, that's good. That's the first record of what I call the mostly Roger era. Roger, by that point, wrote all the words. The whole record's theory was kind of figured out by Roger, but the band was still very much involved in the music. Rick Wright wrote Great Gig in the Sky all by himself. There's one instrumental on the record where Roger doesn't get a credit. It's the three of the other guys basically jamming, I guess it is. Dark Side, it's not bad. If I was to recommend a starting record with Pink Floyd that draws in as much of their history as possible, I think I would go with Metal. And Metal is sort of my old favorite Pink Floyd record because it was the first modern Pink Floyd record. Echoes is the one song, because some of these I've said, what's the one song you play to somebody? Well, I can cheat and say Echoes because it's 25 minutes long or whatever. But really, if I was to play one song for Pink Floyd to introduce Pink Floyd to somebody, I would play One of These Days. And One of These Days, like I said before, you don't know what the sound is. What it is, it's a bass played through an echoplex, just like U2 did a couple of million years later. But it doesn't really, he's sort of bapping it with his thumb, and it doesn't really sound like a bass. And then later, I think there's two basses on that recording. And then there's a thing in the middle where it's sort of choppy and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And if you've ever heard the 4-channel mix, woohoo, it's a lot of fun. But it's very, what's the word I'm thinking of? Strobe light, very stroboscopic sounding, and very, jittery. And then there's Nick Mason in the middle with the slow dub voice, One of These Days. And it's 5 minutes long. It features backward organ shots, which is so Pink Floyd. And it features a pretty darn good slide solo by Dave Gilmour, who did play a lot of slide. 5 minutes to get into Pink Floyd, there you go. Another good place to start would be, although it's technically more than one song, is the first 10 minutes of Dark Side of the Moon, where you go through On the Run, which was just kind of concocted in the studio. Really, their reputation as space rockers rests on the Run, really, I think. Yeah, don't start with Piper at the Gates of Dawn unless you're really into 60s music. It's a fabulous record. You should get around to it. But I say start with metal. Start with One of These Days. It goes into a beautiful little acoustic nothing ballad that they write. Then it goes into a kind of a sludgy rocker. One thing about Pink Floyd, once they got established, they were slow. So if you want fast music, you're probably not. You stick with the first album. So there you have it. I'm trying to keep these short. Don't start with The Wall. I think The Wall is not very good. It's been made into movies and God knows what. I would rather they had made a movie out of Dark Side of the Moon. It'd be more creative. Yes, Dark Side of the Moon, that's okay. But I'd say if you had a choice, start with metal. Then listen to Dark Side of the Moon. And then start jumping around. Their movie records are pretty much optional. Obscured by Clouds, it's okay. And then after The Wall, they did a record called The Final Cut, which is, again, very much a Waters solo record. I don't think it's any good at all. Then they had a big beef. Waters, quote, quit, or they kicked him out or something. And then they came back, and they did these return records with Gilmore and Mason, principally. Rick Wright wasn't allowed to be in the band because of this separation agreement they had. So he was a hired gun. But they were basically Pink Floyd without Roger Waters. And of course, what you got was Pink Floyd without Roger Waters. So you didn't have the deep lyrics that many came to expect from Pink Floyd. But you did have the lush atmospherics and the beautiful keyboards and the guitar solos and the basic sound. Needless to say, it was very popular. They did some tours. The tours just went crazy. They really did well on the tours. They did a live album from the tour. And then Rick Wright got sick with cancer and died. And so they decided, you know what? We're not going to get back together with Roger. And so they tidied up all the bits and pieces from the previous sessions and sort of turned it into another album, which is their send-off, The Endless River. It's actually not bad. None of it is worth your attention. Really, if you don't get past Dark Side and metal, you're not going to like any of this stuff. Although it's very soft, and it's very ambient. I wouldn't recommend any of it, really, unless you get hooked. And the solo records, Roger Waters they all sound like The Final Cut to me. He did an opera, that's really not good. Rick Wright did a solo record, it was bleh. Dave Gilmour did a original solo record that was very good, as good as any Floyd record. Just him in a three-piece band, guy from Foreigner on bass. Roy Harper co-wrote a song on it, I think, and it was good. Then he did another one, About Face. Not quite as good, but still good. And he's gone through the years making enjoyable but not particularly deep records. Nick Mason did a terrific solo record, which was basically a Carla Play record, called Fictitious Sports, that you gotta hear. If you're a Floyd nut, you think you've heard everything, and you haven't heard this, you gotta hear it. It's very good. Chris Spedding, Robert Wyatt, Carla Bley. I mean, it's a crazy New York record, you know. And, yeah. Pink Floyd now gone. Worth study to those interested in the 70s rock. You know, prog rock, I guess you might say. Although they weren't particularly prog. They were no Mahavishnu Orchestra. Anyway, there you have it. Pink Floyd. Going to come up with the big guns soon. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. We've got over 500 subscribers. Apparently at 1,000 I get money. So hey, call your friends and neighbors. Get them to subscribe. I need money. That'd be great to get money for talking about my record collection. That's cool. Thanks for watching. Take care of each other. We'll talk to you soon.